Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 295. How many questions do you think you should ask before offering your opinion? That's a tough one, right? Whether we're talking about work or at home. But if you're working as a consultant in tech, Erik Gross would advise you to not offer your opinion until you have the full context of the problem you're trying to solve and the full context of the organization you're trying to help. Erik is a technologist, an entrepreneur, and a career coach, and he's rejoining us for a conversation in which he'll share some of the lessons learned from his recent entrepreneurial activities. If you missed part one of our discussion in this series in episode 294, Erik talked about what it looks like to go from ideation to taking action on a business idea. And we also talked about how entrepreneurs and managers alike can invest in people even before they're hired by making roles occupiable and writing good job descriptions. This week in part two of our discussion with Erik, you can expect to hear about a successful pattern for learning new technologies that I think will help a lot of us. We'll talk about what you can do to be successful as a consultant. And then Erik will share some thoughts on moving into entrepreneurship full-time. He'll break down the AI and automation space, tell us what it is and is not, share why he landed in that specific space for his most recent entrepreneurial endeavor, and then he'll share some guidance on what technologists like you and me need to be aware of. Let's get you to part two of our discussion with Erik Gross.
There's nothing you can't transfer, even if it seems like it's so intrinsic to who and what you are. But that was not an easy lesson for us to learn. We both had to learn that one.
Do you ever get the feeling of like, well, what do I do here if I don't do this?
What do you mean? Clarify that.
If content creation, for example, was the thing that I built my business around and delivering the content to my students,
yeah,
or people looking to break into this industry, and I no longer do that, does it make me feel like, well, what's my job now?
It's a really good question. It absolutely happens. It's a really weird one. I can talk about this one in the concrete rather than the abstract because there is a bit of that at the school. Two things have happened for me in that regard, and they might resonate with some of the listeners. One is that I was never the administrator, the one who successfully could grow and run a team. That was Jack. And I'd always viewed that as a failing of mine. And that comes with its own self-abnegation and negative thoughts you can think about yourself. And I've gotten over a lot of that, but I've also tried to lean into that a lot more and see, oh, there's a skill that I know I'm not that good at. What am I missing? How do I get better at that? So that's one of them. Even if you've achieved a really strong level of success, there's going to be areas where you're like, yeah, but I'm still not good at that. But the other one is this. This especially, I think, applies to knowledge-based businesses, but it would apply to a product as well. It's never perfect. I'm so proud of our curriculum. I'm so proud of the curriculum we have, but I know it could be better. I know it could be better, right? And it's been 10 and a half years that we've been doing the boot camp. I know that even if it was fine, if it was the best we could produce back in year 2 or 3, I know it can be better now. It's really interesting you would ask about this because the current project I'm on is to literally go through every single one of our 17 different courses, one step at a time, taking notes on every single bit of it about what could be improved. That, first of all, is daunting.
Yeah.
It's I think 13 or 1400 hours worth of content. So it'll take me a while, but I'm super excited about that. And again, because how much more could it serve our students? How much better can the product be? And it's already really good. So that kind of iterative improvement thing, for me, that gets me excited. But you're right. That actually got to me. Like, what is it from Office Space? So what exactly it is you'd say you do around here?
Exactly. Yeah. Let's take the learning thread in that, right? We're talking about the coding school. Your new venture in the AI and automation space, you had to build expertise to get that business started, right? You had to go tinker with the tool. It's one thing to know about or think you have some idea of this problem, but there's a building of expertise that has to go into that. So maybe talk through how people can build expertise in this crazy new emerging AI space that is a hyper buzz right now. And should I be focused here? It's another one of those, is this a new shiny thing that's distracting everybody, or should I put my focus there?
It is pretty wild. I love this. We can talk about it through the lens of AI and automation, but the workable pattern that I use to approach that is one developed over the last 35 years. I'll tell you how I used to do it, and it was wrong. I found that it didn't work for me, right? And it didn't work when I recommended it to other people. So I don't recommend it anymore. You'd find some new technology. Let's use as an example, say React. Let's say it's back in 2012 and it's kind of new and flashy and like, oh, React. And what I would do were I my former self, I would find a current real world project and build it with React. And it would be a nightmare. It would be really, really frustrating. And there's a lot of reasons why that we can talk about. But here's the pattern that I use now and that I recommend with our students and my coaching clients. And I think why I believe it's better will become clear as I describe it. The first thing is I look at that area and I find all the terms, all the unique words in that area that I don't know. I don't even know what the word means.
I love where this is going.
And before I build anything, I will define that word and make sure I really understand what it means. I'll give you an example from the React area. Mm-hmm. They use the word state a lot in React.
Yeah, like Alaska, New Jersey, Oregon.
Exactly. If there was a more overloaded term in technology than state, I don't know what it is. And so if you don't clear up, well, what does it mean in this exact context? Okay, fine. So you clear up those terms. Next, I would find a simple, and I mean rock dead simple tutorial. And this is the important part. Try to find one that only teaches that subject. Let's use React as an example. In my first pouring through the internet for things that I might use to learn React, I found that most of them taught all of the following subjects all in one tutorial: React, JSX, Babel, TypeScript. At a minimum, they were teaching all four of those subjects in one tutorial, but they rarely clarified that they were teaching you four things. They said, if you want to learn React, here's React. I finally found one that taught the simplicity. You know what React is? It's two JavaScript libraries. That's all it actually is.
Wow.
It's the React.js and React.dom.js. It's just two libraries. And if you install that, well, a library, any JavaScript developer knows, so if I install a library, there's a bunch of functions down inside here I can use to do certain things. What can I use to do it? Well, build a simple component. It's just JavaScript. Then all of a sudden, inside this little thing that says render, you write, and this is critical, you write some more JavaScript that can create HTML. And it uses some special functions from that React library. Okay, fine. How many of us have manually created in JavaScript, just through magic strings, some HTML on the page? We've all done it. Okay, good. All right. So all this React library is really doing, as one of its core functions, is that I can use some text to create HTML, and it makes parts of that easier. And I've got a reusable chunk of element on my page. Cool. But no, what they do is they throw in JSX instantly, which is a variant of XML that can be transpiled from JSX into JavaScript, and said JavaScript then creates HTML, but you never see that missing link. You never see the underlying JavaScript creates HTML part of the process. So you didn't even know that's happening.
This is a great example.
It's one that's near and dear to my heart because lots of people want to use learn React, and it's frustrating for them. So to get back to fully answering your question, first, find and clear up all the very specific, unique terms. Secondly, try to find a simple tutorial that only is about that technology. Then and only then, try to build something that you wanted to build and keep it simple. It's this gradient approach. Like, look, some people are probably capable of just saying, oh, well, I need to build, a new customer service rep application for my manufacturing company I work at. I'm just going to go whole hog and build the whole thing with React, even though I've never coded a lick of React. Hey, more power to them. Doesn't work for me. So that's the approach. Fundamental terms, simple, clear tutorial that's only about that technology. Then build a simple project of your own devising. And if you do those three things, you will usually be ready to attack an actual production problem with that technology. So that's the approach I've worked out over the years.
I like that foundational focused approach, because if you learn the terms and a simple tutorial with just that technology well, solidify the concepts, as you said, you can add more components, other parts of the stack. Like, I mean, I guess if I went and found the first React tutorial you mentioned with all this other stuff, and I knew all that other stuff really well, then maybe that's okay. But
I've done this more times than I can count. And it's the curse of the technology educator. We assume too much prior knowledge on the part of the student.
Oh, yeah.
My first one was so embarrassing. I wrote up a little more advanced sort of JavaScript curriculum item. And I said, okay, so the first thing you're going to need to do is spin up a basic HTML page and have an external CSS file in the same project directory. And Jack was reviewing that, and he just stopped and he said, Erik, he says, I have a question for you. He said, do you think that most people know how to spin up a basic web page? I went, well, yeah. And he just started laughing. He said, no, Erik, you're weird. And most people don't learn that. Do you think they teach that in high school? I went, yeah, they taught it in my high school. He said, yeah, you went to high school in the 80s. So I do it too. It's really hard as an expert to genuinely remember what it was like to be a beginner. It's really difficult. You have to consciously try to do that.
Yeah.
But when you do, you produce curriculum that is accessible to anybody, not that small percentage that's bright enough to kind of just grasp it or do their own research on the side. I'm getting on a rant about this because I care so much about the STEM field. And too many of us as educators make that mistake without knowing we're mistaking it and doing the mistake. Some people make it because they like throwing around big words, but whatever.
We talked about in our previous discussion, I think it was episode 267, about knowing what's going on in the learner's mind and meeting that person where they are. Not only does the instructor or educator have to do this, but you've also been a consultant. I actually think the consultant can do this too. And I talked to Dale McKay about this several episodes ago, about how you can use the consulting role to educate. So maybe we could go there for a second. Can you share your thoughts on the similarities between helping someone learn as an instructor and then doing maybe something similar but not quite the same as a consultant? Like, how are those roles the same yet maybe different?
Wow, I love that. And by the way, if any of our listeners have not listened to the episodes with Mr. McKay on them, go do it immediately. Phenomenal interviews. He's what a talented person. Okay, so yeah, there's a difference in approach between teaching something as a technical instructor and how you would approach the consulting thing. And again, won't be a big surprise. I believe it starts with who your audience is and what's going on with them. The student is there to be taught. If you come in as a consultant, the receivers of the consulting are not there to be taught by you and often resent you. All jokes about office space aside, I was a contract technologist for many years. And sometimes I was welcomed, sometimes I was not welcomed. And it's totally understandable. Let's get back to a situation where, say, you're the consultant, because I did a lot of cloud transformation work, right? You're the consultant, and they know they brought you on. At a certain point, you're going to be dealing with not the people that already have some buy-in, the learning and development folks or the engineering leaders, and you're going to have to interact with the SMEs. And this is where you can really run into some difficulty. And in my opinion, it's helpful to understand the basic successful pattern of being a consultant. And it could basically be summarized with listen more than you talk. And it's a real simple thing. And I'm not trying to be obnoxious about it, but here's what I mean. Most engineers, in fact, probably all of us, are hardwired to solve problems. When you're early in your consultant career, the moment a problem comes out of a client's mouth, you instantly mentally start solving it. And sometimes you even start solving it out loud, which is a big mistake. And for me, it has everything to do with the fact that you actually don't have all the context yet. You're making a fundamental engineering mistake, which we all do from time to time, which is you're trying to solve a problem in a microcosm and you don't understand the greater context. You don't know whether the system that you're going to make this change in is got feedback loops and interrelated operations with other complex systems, at the company, for example. But the whole point is, regardless of the particulars, you don't know the context. Nowhere is this more true than you coming in as a consultant with a company, an organization that you never worked at. Yes, you might know the business domain and you have your areas of expertise, but you don't know the context of that company. Your job at first is to shut up and listen. Now, that approach, by the way, has the added benefit of making you seem very, very intelligent. Most people like to talk about themselves. They don't want to talk about you. They want to talk about themselves, their problems, their issues. But what you're genuinely doing is you're asking enough questions that when you finally open your mouth to give a piece of advice, you will know that that piece of advice is one of the most valuable things that engineering leader or SME will have heard in a very long time. Because not only are you not stuck in the problem that they're trying to solve, but you took the time to do something that most of them are not capable of because of where they are in the organization, is you gathered all the data across a broad sector of the organization you're working with from all different points of view. And only then did you open your mouth and give an opinion. You should not be offering opinions in the early parts of an engagement as a consultant. I've seen it before, and people come in all arrogant and I know best and we're going to do so many changes and I can tell you what your problem is right now. No, you can't. You can't. You literally don't know enough to say what the problem is. And you might get it 1 time out of 100 and then feel you have this magic gift, but you don't. So that's the consultant point of view. Utterly different from that trainer point of view. However, if you take that approach as a consultant, there will be a moment where they trust you. And when they trust you, now when you go to teach them something, they'll listen. If you do it a moment before that shift, they're going to be resistant to you trying to teach them anything. That's been my experience, at least. So a lot of fundamental differences between that training and consulting thing, but make no mistake about it. There's a point as a consultant where you genuinely do have to teach them things. Just don't make the mistake of doing it before you have their trust, that you're genuinely an authority. The fact that they hired you or your company for a whole bunch of money does not make you an authority at all. That's got to be earned. And you earn it by asking questions and understanding. And when you ask questions you understand, your questions get better. Your questions indicate more and more genuine grasp of what they're struggling with. And then when you finally don't just ask a question, you give an opinion. That opinion will fully align with their reality. And they go, oh, Erik gets it. Now, I've done it the wrong way before and opened my mouth way too early and then had to backpedal like you wouldn't believe. So I don't do that anymore.
Do you think people ever get tired of answering that next question?
Not if the person who's asking is genuinely interested. That's been my experience. This is a thing in my experience that you can try to teach someone, but only the individual can do it. This applies to sales. It applies to consulting. It applies to honestly any human interaction. It applies to small talk, just making friends. You can't fake genuine interest with someone. They'll know immediately, but you can create your own interest. You're in control of that. For example, I can see part of what's behind you and I'm genuinely curious. Is that Albert Einstein?
Absolutely.
Man, it's been catching my eye the whole time we've been talking. I'm like, I know this is an audio only medium.
Yeah,
but,
and don't worry about Albert. He's pretty quiet, so he won't get in the middle of our discussion.
Good. Although he'd probably be able to contribute a lot more than either of us would. But for the listeners, behind Nick is just a segment, a little bit of a really beautiful black and white piece of art with this really wizened forehead and an eye looking right at me. And I'm like, I think that's Albert. Anyway, but it's got to be genuine. It has to be genuine. So to return to your question, I've never experienced it that people get tired of answering the next question when they know you genuinely want to know, or you're genuinely acknowledging something that you actually really find admirable or cool about what they're doing, or that you're fascinated by. If you fake it, they will figure it out in a heartbeat. People are not stupid. And so for me, the skill to develop is how quickly can I find something I genuinely like about the other person? And what things about that person or their situation am I actually interested in? And you'd be surprised. You can ask sometimes really pointed or private or personal questions. And if you really care, you get amazing answers. I've been deep into a conversation with a SME and asked them, like, why do you think the company keeps screwing this up? And I said it like that, which is not corporate consultant speak.
Right.
And he gave me a very, very real answer. And it opened the door to like, oh, wow, there's a human problem here, not a technological one in a certain area, So I guess those are my thoughts on that. I like that question.
I actually think that's a really good approach to take if you're the newest member of any team.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I'm hearing. I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, I'm a new employee at company XYZ. I don't know my teammates that well, except maybe during the technical interview, that kind of thing.
Yeah. One of my favorite places to waste time on the internet is a site called Not Always Right. And for the listeners who haven't gone there and go check it out, I apologize for wasting the next many, many weeks of your time, because you will go down that rabbit hole, not always right. But that whole idiocy about the customer's always right.
Sure.
When the actual quote is the customer's always right in the matter of taste, right? Or something similar. When you go to that website, it shows you all the wrong ways to interact with people. Most of us have experienced the person who's new to their role, whether they're as a peer or as your boss, that comes in, and we kind of alluded to this earlier, but to be more precise about it, trying to tell you how awesome they are and having the conversations you have with them be all about them. No one wants that. And in fact, if that same person were part of an existing team and someone else came in, they wouldn't want to experience a new person handling themselves like that. Don't be that person. Just find something about the team or the person or the project or whatever that you're like deeply interested in and start asking about it. And if it's genuine, you're not going to get people like, I'm busy, don't waste my time. And be like, yeah, this is a real hack. Like, we really got to fix this, but let me show you what we did to make it work anyway. You get those kind of conversations. We should never have done this, but it worked. Anyway, I've had those conversations. I love those conversations.
Yeah.
This is the ugliest bit of code you're ever going to see. Isn't it cool?
Sometimes the duct tape is needed, right?
Exactly.
It's everywhere. I want to go back to something you said before about how you're looking at being an entrepreneur full time and maybe not going back to working for a specific company. That's an interesting take in our current job market at the time of this recording, because we're seeing a lot of layoffs in the industry. Is that pattern kind of part of this reasoning for going in that direction? I'm really curious to get your take on the current job market for the entrepreneur and employee alike.
Well, there's a few different factors for me, like just as an individual. And I guess on this one, I could just really answer from my own point of view. I've always felt insecure when I only have one source of income. We kind of alluded to this a bit earlier, but adopting instead the viewpoint that you always need to have multiple sources of income. And even more precisely, that if there's some expense that needs to be paid, and really keeping up with your standard of living could be viewed as quote unquote an expense. If there's some expense to be made, I found it really useful to always plan on getting that exact amount from 3 different sources. Let's take a little veer off the path here for a second and look at something we talked about earlier, which is like bringing on a new team member, especially in those early stages of building a tiny little startup. Those are critical decisions, right?
Oh yeah.
I tend to make that decision right before I 1,000% need the person, right before it gets really urgent. I don't wait until it gets super urgent, because then you're scrambling to onboard them and you do a poor job of onboarding them. And whatever caused the urgency gets handled even more poorly than if you just didn't hire someone at all. So I try to hire them right before, but to give myself permission to hire them, I need to have secured what I know I'm going to need to pay them for the next few months times 3. When I brought on my first developer, I knew that they would cost X amount per week. And I made sure that I had closed a contract that was going to bring in 10 times that over the next 3 months. So I'm like, oh, okay, it's safe to bring them on. And then about a week later, I found another applicant that brought something to the table that was extremely valuable to me. I didn't really need her at that point, but what she brought to the table was deep AI and automation experience, and she'd been a developer for 10 years and she could build custom applications where the first person I hired didn't. I'm like, oh, because I know I can do all of that, but I don't want to be the one doing it. I'm much better at the outreach, the marketing, the building relationships, the sales, the closing, all that kind of stuff, right? So I want someone that I can throw the ball to when we need an actual custom piece of software, like make some processing thing that goes out on Azure Functions, and all of my automation tools just hook into the Azure function and it handles something really that isn't off the shelf. I had the conversation with him like, man, I really, really want to hire this lady. But I told her, listen, I might be able to bring you on part-time, but I don't have things in the bag to bring you on full-time. And she was fine with that, although she was looking for full-time. I went out that afternoon and closed another client. First of all, then it was okay for me to make the decision to do it. I wasn't fooling myself, but I firmly believe that part of the reason I closed that client is because the pressure I put on myself of, here's this thing I really want that's going to really be one of the pillars of me expanding. I know it's not the right thing to do right now, but I really want it. I was very impetuous in my younger years, and I would have just done it anyway. At least I restrained myself a little bit. But I wasn't going to restrain myself and just go, oh, well. I'm like, well, then make it okay, Erik. Go out and close another client. Some people aren't going to like this communication, but I've had a lot of failures in life and a lot of successes. And I've learned that the successes usually come from throwing myself into a situation where I have to perform. Period. End of story. Now, the fact is you can always choose to give up. But when I put myself in a situation where I'm like, you have to do this, you grow. And you start to demonstrate to yourself, at least for me, I've seen this to be true, we are capable of so much more than we give ourselves credit for. But sometimes you can't learn that until you just literally jump in the ring. And by the way, that's not going to be one of them. I'm never going to jump in the ring. I love MMA and boxing, but I would be demolished.
Well, sure. Yeah, not literally in the ring, but in a situation.
And I'll get off the soapbox after this. There's such a message in today's society to avoid pressure. That pressure is bad. To stay away from things that cause you pressure or stress or whatever. You grow when you're under pressure. Sales is accomplished with pressure. Accomplishing big, outlandish targets in a business, you have to exert pressure to get it done. And the pressure starts internally. What are you willing to tolerate internally in terms of pressure? And if you can put a tremendous amount of pressure on yourself and perform, you start to build a culture of people around you that thrive on that. And the kind of people that really don't like it, leave. Now, I'm not advocating in that being a jerk.
Right.
It's got nothing to do with pressure at all.
Of course.
But yeah, that's what I found to be real for me, at least.
So in that same vein, how do you increase the pressure on yourself without it being crippling to your performance? Like, is there a way to sense and know how much pressure I am okay with without getting completely crushed by too much?
I like that. I don't know of a scientific way to approach it, but I can tell you what it feels like for me. If I'm looking at something that's a big jump and I'm quite nervous about it, but I don't feel stupid, then I'll do it. If I genuinely feel stupid, I won't. Or more precisely, if I feel like the risk to the people around me that depend on me is too great, then I won't. Because it isn't just about you. For any one of us, especially entrepreneurs, while you might be, I'm just building this off to the side by myself. No. Every moment you have during a day when you apply your energy and creativity to something is precious. And no matter what kind of a life situation you have, those moments that you're putting into that entrepreneurial journey are moments you're not spending somewhere else. It has to be worth it. And if you take that entrepreneurial journey or whatever activity is you're putting all that energy into and put that other unbelievably important aspect of your life, your friends, your loved ones, at too much risk, that's not okay. Now, I'll do some risk. I'll do some. I think that when we last spoke, and I'll make this very brief. In the early days of the Tech Academy, I knew that I wasn't going to be the executive who could build this thing. I knew I was the educator and trainer. And so I put the pressure on myself to make that happen. That was one of the bigger ones where I'm like, this is really shaky, but I did it. That one worked out okay. Tech Academy is still around, doing great, one of the highest rated coding schools in the world. And Jack and I still run it. And it's awesome. Some of them I risked too much and caused harm. So I will say this, it's better to find out where that limit is for you and get burned once than to never be willing to risk it.
I like that. But maybe in a lower stakes situation. Like you choose the stakes of the situation where you're willing to lose it.
Yeah, and that's why I like, for example, that power offer thing I talked about earlier, where you're just going to say, hey, what's risky is to think you know how it's going to be perceived in the marketplace and then go build the whole thing out.
Yeah.
That's tremendously risky. We've seen companies do that. Only our older listeners will kind of get this, but when Coca-Cola came out with New Coke in the 80s, I don't know who did their market research, but they should be fired because it was one of the most colossal failures in modern business. They should have found a way to test that baby before they invested everything they did into it. Same thing. Like, yeah, if you can find a way to corral that risk, then do so. But you can't just let fear hold you back. And you've also got to have a positive opinion of yourself, of your capabilities and your toughness to know that you'll never truly stay down. I think that your confidence and certainty in your own abilities is the most valuable asset you have. I've got a lot of really cool assets in terms of technology skill and writing and teaching all those. Great. They're not the most valuable thing I have. The most valuable thing I have is an unkillable certainty in myself. Didn't always have it. Went through fire to achieve it. But you have to be willing to jump into the fire sometimes.
That's a mic drop moment. We talked about the hype and not getting distracted by the shiny new thing in the tech industry or the newest technology wave, but I don't think we can avoid the AI wave. Like, we need to know something about it, maybe need to be at least competent in that. Are there ways that you're seeing that the technologist can add some value and some knowledge in AI without shifting all of their focus there?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I think that one of the things that the media doesn't do a good job of, it's not a shock. They're not really technologists and they're the media, right? What they don't do a really great job of is really defining their terms. So like we're kind of talking about earlier, I just want to clarify that anybody who's looked at the area who's got a technological background knows that AI is many things. You know, it's computer vision, it's robotics, categories of AI, machine learning, et cetera, right? What's popular right now that we're calling AI is usually like generative AI in the natural language processing space. To further confuse the issue, a lot of these really cool automation tools that are now either completely no code or are low code get lumped into this category called AI, and they're absolutely not. They're using the fact that APIs are ubiquitous to make really cool things happen. That's really all they are. But they are cool. They're not AI. So part of the thing about this relatively new sort of industry called AI and automation that I actually liked right off the bat was at least they're separating out the terms. We are dealing with two separate things here. Now, in terms of like what a technologist might look at in terms of being able to find a way that these areas could be of value to them personally or how they could add value where they work or to other organizations without just getting swept up in the hype, there's a few different things I'd look at. One is if you're not getting really, really good at using generative AI tools like ChatGPT or Claude, right, or the like, frankly, you are doing yourself a disservice, in my opinion. I want to share one specific one, which is the reason I'm actually doing this business now. I looked for that genesis moment, that aha moment. At the beginning, the bootcamp taught C# and .NET technologies. And I remember when MVC really started to get popular. Our more experienced readers may remember Nerd Dinner, which is a wonderful little project that a lot of us use to learn the MVC framework, at least in the .NET space. The point is that a lot of my development during the 2010s was all .NET centric and a lot of MVC centric stuff. And then I really started looking at JavaScript and Node and loved it. In my educational activities and for actual job duties, I've built a ton of Node APIs. And one of the things I love about it as a training tool is that you can spin up a basic API project super simply and easily. And you can use it as a training tool to teach the fundamentals of HTTP request response cycle, endpoints and how you map them, how you do routing, what controllers are all about, what an object relational mapper does and how it interacts with a SQL or NoSQL database. It's a beautiful training playground. I wanted the same thing for the C# world. And here's why I'm telling you this is that for about 2 to 2.5 years, every few months I'd get this bug. I'm like, I want to find a way to do the same kind of thing without going into Visual Studio and spinning up this big giant project using one of their built-in scaffolding things. I'm like, no, just boom, boom, boom. In a minute and a half, I've got it and I can use it as a training tool. I couldn't find it. Last May, I'm like, all right, I've been hearing about this ChatGPT thing for several months now. Maybe it's got legs, which is a joke because they reached 100 million users within like a week or two or whatever. I'm like, I'll try it. Now, I didn't know it, but I made one of the smartest decisions I could in that the thing I was trying to solve at first with it was so precise, so unique, had such defined context, so many constraints, all the things that go into a good prompt, an exact purpose, exact constraints. I'm trying to parallel the experience that I have over here in Node, but over in the C# MVC world, I'd like it to be something that can actually run in VS Code instead of a full Visual Studio. And I laid it all out and I hit enter. And 45 seconds later, the perfect answer came out of that program. Laid out exactly how the code would look, why it would be laid out that way, how you could use it to teach APIs, how easy it would be for a novice engineer to spin up. And I went, what is this? What is this thing? And that's when I went, oh, generative AI changes everything. It changes everything. To go back to the core question, like what's an engineer to do in this area? Well, at the very least, get really good at using generative AI. It's going to improve your own personal efficiency. Now, let's look at that low code, no code space though, which isn't really AI as we talked about. A lot more enterprises are increasing their willingness to let the super user or the engineer actually use these tools to quickly spin up automations in-house. You can build a low code or no code solution to handle middleware concerns or generative text concerns or a lot of automate business processes without spinning up a giant application and figuring out the hosting environment you're going to put it on. In other words, you can deliver value more rapidly in certain contexts, but you have to know how to use these tools first. Thankfully for an engineer, the learning curve is really, really small. It's really, really quick. When we talk about non-engineers, there's a bit more of a hurdle. But I would absolutely, as an engineer, be looking at these low-code, no-code things. Even if you work at an enterprise and you're like, I'm going to stay in the enterprise space for a long time. I don't know what all this, rah-rah you're talking about with entrepreneur stuff is. It's just not for me. You can use it as a career leverage point if you get really good at it, because you will be able to identify a need that could be served by low-code and no-code that other people won't see. They'll think it needs a full-blown application. And you go, oh, I could handle that pretty quickly. And then you handle it faster than anybody thought possible. And it's hosted inside your corporate, inside your firewall. And people go like, Erik, how'd you do that? I don't know. It's magic. But yeah, it can be a real differentiator for people to understand these things. And considering the fact you can also cut in generative AI into it, you can make not just an automated business process, but you can insert in there leveraging natural language processing and everything that brings to bear. So those are some thoughts right off the bat for the engineer. Incredible career differentiator for them. For the entrepreneur, oh my word, this business is something else.
Maybe I want to become a software developer someday and get into that space. Is a low code, no code a nice entry point for me to then ramp into a full blown software developer? And if I only have the low code, no code experience from a most valuable knowledge standpoint, how valuable is that looked upon in my future employment?
Let's just take the first part of that and we'll remember the most valuable knowledge piece for the second part of it. It really depends on your end game. If your end game is to be a working technologist, software developer, engineer, architect, QA, one of those primary technology roles, I don't know that low code, no code is your route into that, because you would have to work really hard to lay in the fundamentals. What is the computer? How does the CPU work? What are the fundamental technologies of the web? What are algorithms? All these data, how is software made? None of those things really apply other than maybe an algorithm to low code, no code. You'll learn some of that stuff along the way, but you'll learn a tiny fraction of what needs to be your solid foundation to be a really competent engineer. You also run a really big risk, and I'm being sarcastic about this, that you might do so well in low code, no code, and make a lot of money that you're like, why would I want to be an engineer? That might happen. Okay. People can make really good money in this area. I want to talk about that second one though, that most valuable knowledge thing, right? Any sort of product or service you're wanting to provide to people, in my opinion, should always start with at least one of the more important concerns, if not the most primary concern, is who do I want to help with this? You happen to be good at something and you're deeply interested and passionate about it. That's a nice convergence in terms of the most valuable knowledge point of view. Really good at it, and you actually are really interested and passionate about it. But where will that intersect out in the marketplace? Now, in the enterprise, this low code, no code thing, still early days, and people are still looking at full-blown software development to solve problems. Now, distributed applications and all the message queues and all that stuff that goes, you can do stuff like that, but you're still looking at an enterprise application deployed out on the cloud and all the infrastructure and everything that goes along with it. Low code, no code is a lot different than that. But if your audience is small to medium-sized businesses, you're the messiah. You are something that has been denied to them forever, which is the unbelievable benefits of custom-made software without paying $50, $100, $200,000 and waiting 6, 9, 12, 18 months. We all know that making custom software is super expensive and takes a long time. It's just true about the industry. Yes, we're always evolving and trying to get that down, driven by market pressures and our own efforts as engineers to be smarter and better and devote our incredibly important time to the real critical problems. We'll abstract away as much as we can. We're going to abstract away all that infrastructure stuff. Can I just write a function and drop it into Azure Functions or AWS Lambda? That's the fun part. Look at this algorithm I built. boom, it drops in and it works. So we're getting more and more towards that, but we're still absolutely not accessible to a small to medium-sized business with what we deliver. And they don't know how software is made or traditionally made. And so they are horrible clients, really bad at requirements gathering, all these things. Now, with low-code, no-code tools and leveraging natural language processing, say ChatGPT or another generative AI, you can accomplish things for them internally that we couldn't even 18 months ago. They're super powerful. I'll give you an example. I've got a client that is in a very specific niche in the fire, water damage restoration space. They actually service only crawl spaces, of all things. If an animal dies under there, or you have some sort of like electrical or water thing that happens under there, crawl spaces have their own unique challenges and unique expertises that are needed. And this company services that industry. And they do very, very well. But there's a lot of areas of inefficiency. I'll just take one. Their ability to predict on any given day exactly who is able to be collected from, money-wise, requires at least 1 or 2 hours of combing through their CRM and extracting every day in a new unit of time who is eligible to be collected on. What if you wanted to predict who can be collected on next week so you can have some prediction of future income for planning of how you're going to allocate funds and resources? Or 2 weeks out, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and so on. They really can't do it unless they spend many hours doing it. And within a few days, all those things are different because jobs shift. It's a major problem for them. Well, you can use a tool called Airtable and build a two-way sync that will extract all of the information from their CRM. And the CRM is horrible, has low latency, and isn't fun to use. And you can have this tool called Airtable, online database essentially, highly performant. And you can define the exact same views that they are creating in Google spreadsheets and having to manually update from the CRM. So you have 2 different sources of truth, or 3 or 4 in many cases, sources of truth. You can actually just define the exact view of the data they want, including who can be collected on today, who's potential for next week, week 2, 3, 4, 5. And the moment something changes in either the CRM or another of these Airtable spreadsheets, it changes instantly for everyone who views the data. What's that worth?
Lots of time, lots of money.
And you can do all of that without writing code.
That makes it nice.
It's stunning. We couldn't really be here in this exact point until about 1.5 years ago because of the generative AI piece. The automation tools, yeah, they've been getting more and more popular. It's becoming an API first world. Most businesses use online services that are optimized for HTTP, RESTful, interaction. But now add into it the generative AI piece, and it just becomes incredible what you can do. So that's a kind of very truncated view of this AI and automation space. You can provide to small and medium-sized businesses stuff that was very out of reach for them in the past. And because of that, you're providing an incredible amount of help, and it's actually within their reach.
Are there any no-code, low-code communities around these tools that you'd recommend people sign up to be a part of?
There's a person I really, really admire out in this space. Won't be hard to find him if you look up AI and Automation Agency on YouTube. His name is Liam Ottley, Ottley. Highly recommend the guy. And it's absolutely worth joining his school community. It's a great community. It's just really great networking. I also love to help people on this stuff. So you can reach out to me. You can go to madwizardmarketing.com. That's our company, madwizardmarketing.com. And if you just want to talk, be glad to. You can also find that same channel on YouTube. Ping me there, right? And I can point you to even more resources. But if you start with Liam Ottley, it's just a great place to start. Really good orientation.
That's fascinating. I really enjoyed this conversation, just like I enjoyed the last ones we had, Erik. So I appreciate you coming back and sending the idea for a conversation. I feel like it went quite well. And where would people contact you if they just have some general questions on anything we talked about?
Well, throw something at Erik G. It's ERIKG, Erik G at madwizardmarketing.com. And that goes straight to me. And again, ask me anything. Like, I'll hop on a half-hour call with almost anybody, just to chat through whatever's going on with them and give them pointers. I don't know about you, but I love the tech field. With certain extremely rare exceptions, the people in it are just really, really good, cool people. And so I'm never opposed to sitting down and talking with someone for a bit.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, definitely. We'll put that link in the show notes so listeners can take advantage.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to let you get away without returning some of this in kind. Like, you're my favorite podcast.
Well, thanks.
Hands down, period. Now, okay, you're my favorite technology podcast.
Sure.
I won't miss Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend ever. But in particular, I just really appreciate what you bring out of your interviewees. There were things I talked about today that I never saw coming, and I really appreciate the opportunity to look out for myself for the first time in a while. You both do a great job, you and John, so thank you.
It's a pleasure, and it's always a good time. You get to meet some great people like yourself.
Thank you, man.
I have to say, I really loved that pattern Erik described for learning new technologies. The singular focus on one specific technology, defining the terms you don't know as a first step. That really resonated with me. Finding a tutorial that only includes working with that technology. That's the hard part. But this I see as a way to guard against that expert's curse. If you find a tutorial that has multiple technologies in it, like Erik described, and you don't understand what everything does, it's probably going to be a frustrating experience, and you may end up missing some foundational knowledge in learning that technology as a result. What if we cross that stream into the discussion of becoming a successful consultant? We talked about consultants needing to ask more questions, listen a lot, and only offer their opinion once they get the full context. Well, when you're a consultant or when you're just having a conversation with someone, make sure when someone uses a specific term that they mean what you think they mean. For example, if someone uses the term cloud in a discussion, what do they mean when they use that term? Do they mean the same thing that you do when you use that term? I've seen examples where the difference in a term someone used and what someone else thought they meant caused a big misunderstanding. So seeking to learn the full context, even around the terminology we use, I think is an important communication aspect we need to be aware of just in general. How many of us are tinkering with those low-code and no-code solutions? A lot of powerful stuff out there that we could use to increase our own productivity or perhaps to help our company do something better. And I like what Erik said about just the awareness that such a tool exists to solve this problem can help you be the hero in certain situations. This is why we should try to stay plugged into different technology trends and solutions, because oftentimes there are different ways to solve problems. I do want to issue a cautionary tale around generative AI, though. Hopefully, most of us are tinkering with that and trying to use it to improve our own productivity. But we need to make sure that we use that within our organization's policies. So make sure you know what your company's generative AI policy is. Maybe your company doesn't allow you to use it at all. Maybe they allow you to use a specific flavor that's only internally or one specific cloud service. And then there's information that you should or should not be putting into a generative AI prompt. So just keep all those things in mind as you tinker around with these tools. There were some undertones of an identity crisis in that conversation. We didn't call it that, but when you're someone who's been a technologist and you go and become an entrepreneur and you start to hire other people who have done things that you made your career doing, like Erik talked about, creating content and being a developer, he can do those things, but he wanted to hire people to do those things because he knew that he needed to focus on the marketing, sales, growth of the business. I think this is a natural reaction, maybe a small identity crisis that the first-time manager, first-time business owner or entrepreneur has when they have to shift their focus fully into that managerial or ownership mindset and might not be able to focus as much on the area of expertise they had before. Because their new area of expertise is supposed to be being a manager or being a business owner, a business leader. It's just an important distinction. I hope you enjoyed this discussion with Erik. If you did, we'd really appreciate it if you'd rate us 5 stars, write a review, and tell us what you liked about it. Share this episode with a friend. We'll see you next week.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_. signing off.
Adios.